Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm pleased to be joined by Craig Waldron, who served as city administrator for the city of Oakdale for 20 years and as a respected uh, highly respected leader in local government, and is now serving as I believe you're an adjunct professor at Hamline University. Is that right, Craig?
Yes, I'm adjunct at Hamlin. I had actually been there full time for a while for 4 years and retired from there and still do some adjunct work. And then right now I'm doing a lot of local government consulting too. I still want to keep working with the local units of government. So I'll do quite a bit of consulting there, ranging from development to strategic planning. So still trying to keep a toe in the water, so to speak.
Okay. And just for the benefit of our listeners and readers, Craig and I go way back. We were just talking about 30 years ago. I was working
Yeah,
for a weekly newspaper in Oakdale at the time when Craig was city administrator there. And it's been nice that we've been able to reconnect once in a while to talk about city related issues from time to time here in my role with finance and commerce. So it's really good to see you again. And
great to
always nice
see
to
you
connect.
too. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, great to see you.
So before we get into some of the development related issues, can you talk a little bit more about sort of your focus at Hamlin and how you made that transition from working directly in city government to being an educator now?
Okay. Well, I had always had an interest in uh, teaching, and while I was at Oakdale, they were very good and actually helped me pursue my doctorate in Hamlin. So that kind of enhanced my relationship at Hamlin a little more. And the interesting thing about Hamlin and their approach, they had a really good master's program in public administration, and they really made an effort, along with some pretty good permanent faculty, to bring in adjuncts, people that had actually been out there in cities and counties, and people that actually had worked on real economic development deals and so forth. So it just ended up a really good fit for me with my background and all the scar tissue that I developed over the years and working in, projects and local government, and then, having the academic piece. So it was just a really good fit. And even to this day, I'm still doing some work with some of the doctoral students and so forth. And in the local government or public administration program, I think it's helpful to have a number of your faculty members that have actually been out there and worked in the real world, and like I said, develop some of that scar tissue and experience.
Yeah, and just I was wondering if you could think back to your time in Oakdale and the years you spent there, and what were can you touch on some of the, I guess, challenges and opportunities during that time in the 90s when it came to attracting new investments and uh, development, and also balancing that with the, I guess, the concerns of existing residents?
Sure. It was really interesting when I originally went there. Part of the difficulty was Woodbury and Western Wisconsin was really making life difficult for Oakdale in terms of its development. So that was one of the priorities in terms of them bringing me over from Roseville, where I was the community development director there for 8 years. And it was really a good situation where I had an excellent city council to work with. I think that's one of your critical priorities, that you have a council that knows where they want to go and they stick together. I never would have thought I would have been in Oakdale for over 21 years, but they were just outstanding mayors and councils that made the job, and particularly development, much easier. But we pretty much had to design a program from the ground up. You've got to get people really interested or on board in terms of the incentives and understanding what developers are going through. Also, of course, you've got the profit motive and they're trying to make money, but it's not necessarily that easy to get stuff done. So you need to encourage people to look at it or understand what their perspective is also. And so being able to set up pretty aggressive programs, and the city councils just kept letting us get more aggressive all the time, to where we were eventually buying land and marketing it ourselves and so forth. So having a progressive council was really important. And the residents, although pretty good, it could be difficult at times. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges out there, that it's the level of civility and, working with some of the residents can really be difficult. One of the things that kind of a paradigm shift that I've seen is that it used to be difficult enough just trying to get the financing together and make that work. Now you can get through that most of the time, but then you got the politics of trying to get stuff done. One of the things that I said I was going to do at Hamline was to make sure that our students understood that you're working in a political environment, and you better figure that out and understand how you have to steer these deals through a political system. And if you don't understand that, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So I kind of made that one of my missions in all of the classes before I retired full-time at Hamline, to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I was just thinking about that, and it seemed like back in the 90s, you'd always have people showing up at city council meetings or to talk about maybe their concerns about a project, or maybe they'd write a letter to the editor, and and I'm sure people always have legitimate concerns. I don't want to downplay that, but now with the advent of social media, it seems like it's gone to another level. You just post something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and boom, things just explode when you talk about how things are political. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
I had come out of meetings, and the Twitter wire or Facebook was going 100 miles an hour based on people that had been in the meeting or had been there in opposition, and that's flying 100 miles an hour before I even got out of the meeting and could figure out a response. We kind of figured out a system in the 90s and later on, as this stuff became more difficult, is that we would spend a lot of time talking to our developers about where things were and so forth, and how you would work through the system, but then also keeping the city council and the politicians in the loop step by step also. And then we'd have the developers work a neighborhood meeting and so forth, and try to talk through concerns and develop a relationship with the citizens. But then we'd also utilize work sessions where the potential of the development and the developer would come through and talk to the council in a work session environment, get the city council more familiar with what was going on, and essentially, kind of do the thing. Okay, now here it is. Are you comfortable? We've had this discussion, and the developer's going to make this change and that change. Are you ready to go? And we'd make sure we had the nod to move forward with the project. And then one of the things that I always tried to do is that I didn't want to go into a meeting not knowing whether we had the votes and whether everything was ironed out. So, I would really work with the council members and check in with them even right before the meeting to make sure everything was okay. I don't think anything could be more disastrous going in one of your critical, more important developments, not knowing that you've got the support to get the thing done.
Mhm.
So we really had to work hard on our methodology to make sure that we could get the important things approved and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. A lot of different layers to that. But
Yes, many.
one thing I'm hearing now is about there's a need for more housing in general. And when I think back to the 90s, and if I'm recalling this correctly, it seems like when there was a big open field that was a greenfield development site, you'd put up a lot of single family houses and things like that. Now it seems like we're seeing more mixed uses on these development sites with townhomes, some apartments, as well as single family. Are you seeing that as well? Is that a trend you've
Yes.
been seeing?
Yeah, I do think that's a trend, and actually goes back to some of the discussion that you and I've had on PUDs also, that helps facilitate that trend. But I do think combinations and different levels of density and opportunities. I think you're seeing, many more developments like that. And, I think just in terms of the housing shortage that we still see out there is that we do need more multifamily development, but on the flip side, multifamily development could be more controversial in the communities also. So it's really a double-edged sword there.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about affordable housing and deeply affordable, and
Yeah,
you get it,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the things we could have done in the 90s and we didn't, and I think those of us that were in the cities based on a lobbying effort kind of shot it down. But when I look back, I think the impact would have been tremendous now over time. And that's where, and you may remember this, where the state was proposing that in any multifamily development, we'd have to have so many affordable units within those developments. And, some communities have made that part of their ordinance and so forth, but this would have been a statewide requirement. And it kind of got shot down by the various levels of local government, because it was kind of infringing on local control and so forth. But could you imagine if we would have had that in place now for the past 30 years, and the number of low mod units that would actually be available? So in a way, I think we ended up as our own worst enemy back in the 90s when that happened.
Yeah, interesting. Well, one you mentioned PUDs there briefly, and we did chat about that for an article I did a while back, and I thought that was an interesting discussion. One thing I heard from home builders who had concerns about PUDs is that, and I think the quote is that it allows cities to tuck in all the extras that they want, like aesthetics, like stucco siding requirements and things like that. And I thought you had an interesting response to that, kind of from the city perspective. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I think PUDs used properly can really be helpful. And I think if you're working on this where you're letting the developers provide more density within a PUD project or something like that, or you're waiving some parking requirements as part of the PUD, that it is reasonable to ask them to do a few more things as long as you're not getting silly. And some communities can get silly. We're doing a PUD and we can require all this stuff that we're going to make them put pillars on the entrances and all of that. I think that that can get out of hand, but I think reasonably used and with a good negotiation between the city and the developer, they can really work out well. But I think you need to be realistic on both sides. And again, I think looking at it from my city perspective, that if you are, providing more flexibility and, letting the developers do some things that you normally wouldn't get to do under the normal zoning requirements, I think it is reasonable to, look at some other amenities, as I said, as long as you're not getting silly about it. I think it can be a really great tool for both sides.
Mhm. Yeah, as long as it's reasonable and
Yeah.
makes sense. And I want to ask you a little bit too about tax increment financing. If a developer comes to town and wants to do a project and they ask for TIF assistance, what are some of the things the city looks at when determining if that's appropriate or not?
Okay. Well, as you know, I'm a great believer in TIF when used properly. Also, I think it can be an outstanding tool. It really helped us on a number of the Oakdale, and I also helped North St. Paul out later on in my career here, and I think it can really be helpful. What we would always look for is first of all is the proposal within the guidelines, the priorities of the city or the strategic plan. Are they coming in looking at an area that's a redevelopment area that's a priority to us? Are they providing a type of housing that's a priority? So first of all, you have to look at where the development stacks up within a strategic plan if you're going to be putting some public investment into it. Then I think the thing that's really critical, and for as long as I've been around, like 50 years in this stuff, I remember the early days where a project would come into a city and it's kind of like, well, will you give us TIF and we'll tell us what you want and we'll get it to you. And it's just like, no, what we would ask is that you tell us what you think you need. So give us your pro forma so we can understand what the but for really is and what you really need. So you come in and ask for TIF. We're just not going to say, yes, you tell us how you need it and what your plan is. And then I think the smartest thing that communities do is once they get that, then they'll use their finance director and then either a Baker Tilly or an Ellers to analyze that and make sure that it is reasonable and you're all on the same page. Well, then you're really in a good position where in working with the developer, you do kind of agree on what the incentive is, and it makes sense based on your own independent analysis. And then at that point, you're providing information to your council and keeping them in the loop and so forth. But having that analysis by the fiscal agent, when you go before the public and the council, you have an independent body that's actually saying, no, we've looked at this and this amount is reasonable and it's okay and it will be a good investment for the city. And in the early days, that did not necessarily happen. That's happening more all the time.
Mhm.
And again, when I was talking about going through the development process and working with the council and independent work sessions and so forth, we'd broach the tax increment thing too. And they're going to need TIF to get this done. We've analyzed it. Here's what we think it's going to be, and be prepared as we're going through the land use issues that we're going to have TIF as part of the discussion also. And I think the city councils became, at least the ones I've worked for, comfortable on the process when they understand that you really are looking at the need for this and you're not going above and beyond what the need is. And it does fit into the city's priorities, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work
Mhm.
getting that done.
Yeah, I can just imagine. So you touched on a little bit some of your background in city administration. Of course, we talked about Oakdale. You did some work with North St. Paul, and I believe you're an elected official in, was it North Mankato for a time?
Yes, once
Um,
upon a time, yes, I was actually a two-term city council member in North Mankato, which,
okay.
looking back, actually helped me, having been on the other side of the table as a politician, elected official. You're right.
Mhm. Yeah, so how did you become interested in getting into that line of work in city administration? Is it just something you always dreamed of doing, or?
Well, to an extent, I'm one of those 60s kids that, I remember Kennedy talking about asking not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. So that struck me as a kid. And then as I got older, I always thought I want to do something where I'm making a difference. And so as I kind of progressed in my undergraduate career and so forth, and I started to see some of these governmental opportunities, I just kept gravitating towards government, and I could see that that's a place where you really can make that difference in your city, and you can actually see it happen and be part of it. So just wanting to have that type of impact. And then out of that kind of grew our internship programs, and that got me interested in the educational side of this too. So I really wanted to work with the next generation of leaders that's going to be coming into public administration also. So I
Mhm.
always knew early on I wanted to do something that was going to make a difference. I wasn't quite sure what that would be or how I would be able to work that out. And then over time, I just saw the local government stuff and how that could certainly be a big opportunity. And it's interesting working with some of the undergrads. Hamline has a mentoring program, and we work with some of the undergrads, and it's really interesting. This Gen Z wants to make a difference and be involved and so forth. And you talk to them about local government, it's just like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this. I could work
Mhm.
in parks, or, I could, do planning stuff or work on environmental stuff. It's just like I had no idea that that was available. So we try
Yeah,
to push that point and help people understand the opportunity that's there.
that's great. And you talked before about um, the relationship you have with the elected officials, working with the city council and the mayor. And I remember, the late Ted Berth in Oakdale and how he was so
Oh
involved
yeah.
in that community from Summerfest planning and everything else, and just how committed he was to the city of
Oh,
Oakdale. And but I don't know what
Ted
you can
Berth
recall
is
about that.
really Ted Berth is really one of my heroes. I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, you'd cut that guy and he'd bleed little Oakdale trees, what I mean? He was just outstanding. And like I say, he was everywhere. He was wonderful to work for, very supportive of his staff, which you don't necessarily find all the time with some elected officials. He was just great. And like you said, in addition to the council stuff, he was involved in every aspect of the community, from summer fest to trying to make sure that we had the appropriate ballparks in place
Mhm.
and so forth. It was just amazing. And he was also one of the things that I didn't mention. A good mayor can be one of your best weapons in terms of economic development, because a developer or company would hear from me. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're the hired gun, Craig. You're paid to say that. Ted Berth and also Carmen Serac years later
Mhm.
too, as mayor, they could call up these companies and smooth the CEOs and so forth. It's just make a tremendous difference, all the difference in the world. So
Mm.
yeah, he was pretty incredible. And even then, before he passed away, he was a Washington County commissioner. So he just kept that commitment up to local government to his very last days. So a
Yeah,
very good man. I miss him.
yeah, yeah. I have a lot of good memories of Ted too. He was
Yeah.
a, a nice man and deeply committed to big Golden Gopher fan. And
Yeah. 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 And I
our,
was an old Iowa Hawk. That
yeah,
always
yeah.
made things interesting.
I was going to ask you about that. Are you from the Midwest? You did go to, I know you did undergraduate schooling at Iowa, right? But are you from the area?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was originally born in Chicago,
Okay.
and then my dad was a production manager for a dairy. He was in Chicago, and they transferred him to the Quad Cities. So since I was, what was I, 6 to 18 years old or 20 years old, we had lived in the Quad Cities in Davenport, Iowa. So I did go to the University of Iowa my last 2 years in undergrad. And it was interesting, again, trying to think I was going to do this public service stuff. I was also thinking about maybe going to law school and, being an environmental attorney or something like that. But then I heard about the urban studies program at Minnesota State. Boy, everybody was coming out of there and getting really cool jobs. The faculty was featured in Time magazine on some of the projects. And it's just like, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to law school. So in
Hmm.
72, we came up to Mankato and we just fell in love with Minnesota and, have never looked back. So yeah, once we got up here, we stayed from 72. So in Mankato until 85. And then that's when I came to Roseville.
Great. Well, we've been lucky to have you here, Craig, and I don't want to take
Uh,
up too much of your time because I know that you're out in Colorado, I understand,
yes, yes, yeah.
and enjoying some time out there with family. So, um, but are there any other parting thoughts you might have before I let you go? You know, again, I really enjoyed
Well,
the conversation.
I just uh, I just probably the parting thought that I would have, because we have, both developers and elected officials and so forth, is that, I would just really encourage each other to, walk a little bit in each other's shoes. The elected officials need to understand what developers are going through and how they're trying to get stuff done. But, also the developers and businesses have to understand that the other side's working in a difficult political environment where civility is getting even worse. So I just think having an understanding and getting a little bit in each other's head is gonna breed success and ensure successful communities. But it takes a lot of work these days.
Yeah, very, very well said. Well, thank you for your time, Craig, and
Yes,
hopefully we can stay in touch. Always enjoy visiting with you.
absolutely.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Enjoyed connecting with you too. Take care.
Awesome. Take care.